Hello, my name is Michael Parker, and welcome to Antidote, the show that introduces you to the people that you need to know and the stories you need to hear in the 21st century. Today we're speaking with Los Angeles-based author Dave McGowan. Dave, your book, Weird Seeds Inside the Canyon. Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. The 1960s is possibly the most written about decade of all time. And yet you managed to find fertile ground discussing Laurel Canyon. Laurel Canyon is this magical place that I think the people who have heard of it probably have the same visions that I did growing up, reading Rolling Stone, rock stars and parties and actors and swimming pools. Yet you depict it on the cover as a wash in blood. So there were many revelations to me in this book. So let's start with the primary revelation, which was Lookout Mountain Laboratories. Tell us about that.
Lookout Mountain Laboratories was a top secret U.S. Air Force installation nestled up in Laurel Canyon, the existence of which remained unknown until fairly recently, even within the conspiracy community. Very few people seem to be aware of the existence of this facility, which remained operational at least through 1969 officially, and according to other sources, considerably beyond that, but certainly through 1969 during the peak years of the Laurel Canyon music scene. Which was, a very curious discovery, to say the least, to find that nestled right in the middle of this bucolic hippie commune, so to speak, was a highly classified military establishment that was in full operation.
When was that built?
It was built World War II years, I believe, initially as a anti-aircraft installation to protect Los Angeles against a possible aerial attack during World War II, and then it morphed into a film studio at some point and was said to be the world's most complete self-contained film studio.
So, okay, if it's a film studio for the Air Force, what were they developing? What were they shooting? What was the point?
Well, the main purpose, according to various sources, was to process the raw film stock from the early atomic bomb tests, the nuclear weapons tests. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, like I say, this was a fully operational film studio that capable of doing everything in-house. They had, every animation department, editing facilities, film vaults, sound stages, everything to make a film from soup to nuts. And, to process raw film stock, all you really need is a darkroom. Could have been anywhere. There was no need to fly that film all the way, to this remote outpost in Laurel Canyon that was a fully functioning film studio. So obviously there was a lot more going on there than what has been acknowledged. Whether we'll ever know the full scope of what was being done at this facility is, an open question.
Well, one of the strange things in the book that you mention is that people like John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, these guys had ID passes. What were they doing there? Were they narrating things? Why would they need to be a part of this?
Yeah, some real heavyweights from Hollywood. Performers like Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, as you mentioned. I think Jimmy Stewart, and very heavyweight filmmakers like I think John Ford and a couple others. Were involved. They had security clearance to work in this facility, and yet no one seems to know exactly what they did there, and they remained remarkably closed-lipped about it. Pretty much all of them, as far as I know, went to their deaths without ever even mentioning the existence of this facility, let alone that they had any association with it. So it was a very well-kept secret for a very long time.
I've lived here for 20 years. 20 plus years. I had never heard of this, and now that I've seen it in your book, I think it's finally getting some play I believe Jared Leto just bought the house for like
Yeah.
cool $5 million.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, that was just in the paper not long ago, which is a bargain price actually.
I think so,
This,
too.
I mean, this is a huge facility that I mean, it had heliports and all kinds of stuff at one time, and I know it transitioned into residential housing for a while, and then it was bought by some entity that I believe operated it for a while as like a celebrity rehab center.
You're right.
And but most recently, yeah, it was just in the LA Times just within the last few weeks that Jared Leto has now purchased it as presumably as a private residence or maybe as an investment property. I don't know what he plans on doing with it.
So we've got this strange covert military installation looming over Los Angeles. In Santa Monica, we have the Rand Corporation, another spooky entity. This all looms over LA and the burgeoning entertainment scene, which takes us to the real point of the story, which is the rock and roll that came out of Laurel Canyon. And certainly the most famous or enigmatic figure to emerge from that scene would have to be Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the lead singer of The Doors. But he also had a very conspicuous father. Tell us a little bit about Jim and his father and their place in that strange saga.
Yeah, Jim was certainly a larger-than-life figure, to this day, very, very iconic figure. Yeah, the curious thing about him is that his father was actually a very high-ranking Navy admiral, which that part was known prior to my work on this book. But what I discovered, which had not been previously reported, is that not just was he a Navy admiral, but he just happened to be the Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was the commanding officer of the ships involved in that notorious incident, which of course led immediately to the passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution and then to the full-scale involvement of ground troops in Vietnam and ultimately the deaths of some 60,000 Americans and countless millions of Vietnamese and Laotian and Cambodian people, all of which was a direct result of this so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, which, Jim Morrison's father was a key figure, to say the least, in orchestrating that whole incident that quickly resulted in the U.S. being, engulfed in a very, very bloody quagmire over there. And that happened just like within a year or so of the sun emerging on the Laurel Canyon Sunset Strip scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war, peace movement crowd. So there was a very curious juxtaposition there, to say the least, that you have the father sailing off to, help choreograph this incident that drug America into this bloody quagmire, and then the son almost simultaneously emerging on the scene as this larger-than-life icon of the anti-war crowd. And never mentioning, of course, who his father was throughout his years of fame. He conspicuously avoided ever mentioning who his father was and what a key role he had played in.
And we can only guess as to why that was, but there's a picture in the book that shows Jim, the young Jim, the collegiate Jim, very clean-cut, preppy almost, with his father on the bridge of the what's the name of the ship?
Bonham Richard, I believe it was?
Bonham Richard, which was the ship in the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Correct, yeah.
So it gets even weirder because you discuss the fact that Jim, and I've had other people who are big Doors fans kind of confirm this to me independently, Jim was not really a likely candidate to be a rock star, and he wasn't even a musician.
Yeah, he had no musical background at all, by his own account. He had never had much interest in music, even as a fan. He said he'd only been to like 1 or 2 concerts, in his life. He didn't really listen to a lot of music. He never viewed himself as a singer. Never learned to read or write music. Never learned to play an instrument. Even after he achieved fame with the Doors, he never learned to read or write music or play an instrument. yeah, and you know, by his own account, he you know, was not, he'd had no musical training and had never viewed himself as a, you know, musician or singer-songwriter. And as you say, not long before he emerged as this figure that we see here, yeah, it was a very much different Jim Morrison, very clean-cut, collegiate, almost unrecognizable. You know, seeing his father off as he was about to leave, I think sailed out of San Diego for the Gulf of Tonkin, and yeah, and within a year he had completely transformed himself physically and emerged as this rock star, just out of nowhere. I mean, it's just an amazing physical transformation and an amazing transformation from someone who had expressed no interest in music whatsoever to, you know, just like overnight becoming this huge international star.
He was, the Doors, the whole scene that they emerged from, largely considered to be the leaders of an anti-war movement. Obviously, we know what happened with the Doors as they continued, but what blew me away, Dave, Jim died the same day his father gave a speech on the decommissioning of the ship that he was the rear admiral on during the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah. Yeah, it was yeah, very strange.
That's really weird.
Very strange timing, yeah, to say the least.
It's almost like both of their missions were done.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jim Morrison was just a fascinating guy, you know. I mean, in a very short period of time, from like 1964 to 1971, there were like 3 separate Jim Morrisons, really. I mean, he just had a remarkable ability to reinvent himself, you know, from this clean-cut collegiate kid to this, you know, this Greek god rock star, yeah. And then in the later years to a very overweight, heavily bearded, reclusive poet. You know, and you look at pictures of Jim in these 3 eras, and which were very, you know, close together in time, and he looks like 3 completely different people. It's extraordinary, really, the capacity he had to reinvent himself, which is one thing that's given rise to various theories that he didn't actually die in Paris, but reinvented himself once again and went on under a new persona, which is not beyond the realm of possibility. But
it's one of those things that I never gave too much thought to. I didn't buy it, but after having read your book, having spoken to other friends who are Doors devotees, who knows? Jim Morrison, amazing rock and roll performer. Let's move on, because there were so many bands that emerged out of the Laurel Canyon scene. And one of the things that we're going to find that is the primary premise of the book is almost all of these bands had within their family background military intelligence, some form of military ties, political ties. I'm going to name some of the bands out of Laurel Canyon because there's so many. The Byrds, the Doors, Buffalo Springfield, the Monkees, the Beach Boys, Steppenwolf, Love, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, the Turtles, the Mamas and the Papas, the Flying Burritos Brothers, the Eagles, America. There was the singer-songwriters, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Carole King. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's amazing how much talent poured out of such a tiny geographic area over such a very short period of time.
It's remarkable. One of the things I was going to ask you, just so people get a grasp of what we're talking about here, I'm going to ask you about a couple of people, and you tell me what their relationship was to these military backgrounds, because some of these people were, I couldn't believe it. Papa John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas.
He was the son of a career Marine Corps officer who also various other members of his family were very closely tied to the military as well. His mother, his older sister, and his first wife were all career Defense Department employees. So, I mean, pretty much his entire family, everyone around him was a career military person, mm-hmm. And he himself was prepped for a military career. I believe he was a West Point appointee or Annapolis, one of the two. I get confused because so many of these people have such very similar backgrounds. So yeah, his entire family pretty much was from the military background, and not only that, but his first wife was also a direct descendant of John Adams, the second president of the United States, which is another thing that you will find is that some of these people, in addition to having a military or military intelligence background, a lot of them kind of come from what we could call like royal sort of blue blood bloodlines, so to speak. That's another commonality that a lot of these people share.
Well, speaking of blue bloods, the most unlikely person, David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he was in the Byrds as well.
He was in the Byrds.
Talk about David Crosby, because he's an enigmatic character.
Yeah, he was a Byrd, one of the founding members of the Byrds, the original members, and the guy who emerged as the biggest star. I mean, the name that we remember today, most people don't remember Gene Clark and Chris Hillman and even Roger McGowan and Gene Clark is and the drummer was Michael Clark. Most of them are, unless you're a real hardcore fan of that era, they're long forgotten. But David Crosby, of course, still lives on as an iconic figure. And like a lot of the people, most of the people who emerged from that scene as the big iconic figures, he has a very curious family background. Yeah, his full name is David Van Cortlandt Crosby. And he is a direct descendant of three interrelated families: the Van Cortlandts, the Van Rensselaer, and the Van Schuyler families. And if you look them up, bounce around Wikipedia for a while, you will find that his family tree includes just people occupying virtually every position of prominence that you can imagine, back to the founding of the country. Revolutionary War generals, Civil War generals, judges, senators, congressmen, governors, just everything short of the president. Various members of his family have occupied for well over 200 years now. So yeah, definitely a blue blood type of family. And his father, did naval intelligence work during World War II. So.
Well, Stephen Stills in the same band was an interesting character as well.
Stephen Stills was actually in Buffalo Springfield.
Yeah,
they were like they were kind of the first two out of the gate, the first two kind of folk rock bands that really set this whole thing off. And of course they then later joined forces as Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but. Yeah, Stephen Stills, his father appears to have been some type of a covert operative. He's described in various biographies as a mercenary or soldier of fortune or various euphemisms, and he spent a lot of time bopping around various hot spots in Central and South America where, just happened to be places where we had a lot of covert operations going on, and so Stephen moved around a lot, and to various grew up partially in military bases and military schools in and around Central America. So once again, one of the person who emerged as the sort of biggest figure from the original band, Buffalo Springfield. Yeah, once again has the same, which we find time after time after
Frank
time.
Zappa.
Frank Zappa, according to the leader of the Mothers of Invention. Not a band that ever really achieved the commercial success and popularity that a lot of these other bands do, and still to this day you won't really hear much of their music on the radio, almost never, but yet a hugely influential with other musicians, just viewed as a
incredible musician.
Yeah, incredibly talented guy. We wore all the hats. Songwriter, musician, producer, arranger. He could do it all. Phenomenally talented and influential guy, and also he started up a couple of record labels in Laurel Canyon.
That's right.
And introduced a lot of the other. He was the guy who got a lot of other bands their start.
Alice Cooper.
Alice Cooper, yeah, strangely enough, was, not really thought of as being a part of that Laurel Canyon scene, but yeah, sure enough, he was. The band was. But Zappa's father was a chemical warfare engineer, initially assigned to the Edgewood Arsenal, which is where Frank was born and spent the first 7 years of his life. They actually lived in military housing on the base, and he went to school and lived the first 7 years of his life at the home of U.S. chemical warfare, strangely enough. So, yet again, rather curious, family background.
Just a few more, because we've got much to cover, but Jackson Browne, Graham Parsons, America.
America, all three of them were sons of Air Force officers who met on a Air Force base in the UK that was known as being an intelligence outpost. So all their fathers were most likely Air Force intelligence officers. They were certainly Air Force officers. And they first got together on a military base. Jackson Browne was born on a military base in post-war Germany during Reconstruction. His dad was one of the, likely an OSS operative, with that being the organization at the time, prior to the CIA, that was in charge of Reconstruction efforts and the denazification process in post-war Germany, and that's where Jackson Browne was born. And I don't remember, I think you mentioned another one, but I'm not sure.
Graham Parsons, another kind of blue blood type character in a way.
He was very much of a blue blood, yeah. His family originally owned the majority of the citrus groves in Florida and Georgia, and a very, very wealthy clan that also included the Hershey family and the founder of the Hershey's chocolate empire. So yeah, once again, he came from a very, very blue blood family that had deep roots, going back to the founding of the country. And his father, who he didn't know for all that long, because he died when he was fairly young, shot, listed as a suicide, although that's kind of questionable. And he was military. He was, I think, a fighter pilot. And then the guy who actually raised him, Robert Parsons, who gave him his name, his adoptive father, appears to have been an intelligence operative also. He was very closely involved with training exile Cuban groups in Florida Everglades to topple the Castro regime. And it's not a big mystery who was in charge of running all those operations. So if that's what his father was doing, then obviously he had some kind of a CIA connection. So.
Okay, so we've got all of these people that moved to Los Angeles, and you make the point in the book that at this point in Los Angeles history, it was not the music center that it would become. At that point, it was New York, Nashville, Detroit.
Detroit, yeah.
Those were the primary music centers.
Those were the main hubs, yeah.
If you were going to want to do popular music of that period, those are one of the places you probably would have gone, but they all come out here. Many of these people actually know each other. They went to school together, or they're on the various army bases, and then they put together bands. For example, the Byrds. You point out in the book that the Byrds, frankly, were not that good in the beginning, and they didn't really have much gear. Did they share a space with Vito Polakis or something? Because that whole,
they used his
Byrds,
studio as a rehersal space. Yeah,
tell us about that, because they just kind of blew up out of nothing, and there's weird people in the band that don't know how to play.
Yeah, it was. If you really look at the beginning, the genesis of these bands, it doesn't really seem very organic, in the sense that these were just a lot of guys that were friends and fellow musicians that had similar musical interests and got together and decided to form a band, and just sort of a natural progression of things. This was more like some of these bands had definitely had the appearance of being cast, and the Byrds, which was the first one out of the gate, was probably the most obvious in that regard, in that their entire rhythm section literally did not know how to play their instruments. Their drummer had never picked up a pair of drumsticks in his life. He had played like bongo drums or something. And their bass player was a very accomplished musician, but he was a bluegrass mandolin player. and yet he was the guy that they drafted to be in the world's first folk rock band, to play bass, guitar. I mean, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. That, you know, and yet. And despite the fact that they, you know, most of them did not really know how to play their instruments and did not have, you know, professional quality equipment to even perform with, they were very quickly signed and provided with studio space and rehearsal space, recording space, got brand new instruments, and all of a sudden they were a band. And
well, you mentioned in the book that not only did these bands spring up very quickly, but the club scene within Hollywood blew up. All of a sudden, you've got Pandora's Box and these various clubs. I guess the London Fog?
London Fog, the Whiskey A Go-Go, the Kaleidoscope, a whole bunch. I mean, there was a bunch of them, some of which, you know, still remain to this day. The Troubadour, I think, is still there, and the Whiskey, is the Whiskey still there?
The Whiskey and the Troubadour still exist. But what you're saying is these bands come about very quickly.
Very quickly.
Dubious musicianship initially, but an infrastructure builds up around them.
Correct, yeah.
Clubs to play, venues to play, a radio station to play their music. The record labels, usually not ones to immediately fork out some cash immediately, are signing these bands right and left. And then you describe also another misnomer about kind of hippie culture in general was these characters, Vito Polakis' group, and how they kind of created the whole hippie aesthetic, and what was their role in making the bands further popular?
Yeah, they are widely credited with people who were on the scene at the time as being the world's first hippies, the people who really started sporting the hairstyles and the clothing styles and just the whole attitude and whatnot that would become known as, you know, the hippies. Or they called themselves freaks, but you know, very quickly became known by under other names, hippies and flower children and whatnot. And yeah, he's the guy. His troupe is largely credited with creating all that. And he was an older guy. He was already in his 50s, considerably older than the bands that he was hanging out with and the other people in his troupe. And basically, he led this dance troupe that was wildly popular in the clubs on the Strip. So much so that they'd be let in free to the clubs because the owners realized that they were the ones that were drawing the crowds. And they would put on these just wild and crazy dance performances that were just, you know, like just that nobody had ever seen before. You know, I mean, here come these people with these crazy hairstyles and clothing styles and doing these dance moves that nobody's ever seen before.
I'm kind of picturing the twirling girls at like Dead concerts or something.
And you know, a lot of people have acknowledged that they were one of the main, that they were the initial draw because, you know, these bands were unknown. They had just arrived in town, and all of a sudden they're getting signed and they're getting recording contracts, but nobody knows who they are. And all these clubs are just popping up like mushrooms along the Strip, but they're all new too. They don't have an existing clientele, and you know, people have no real compelling reason to go out to these clubs to hear these new bands that they've never heard of. And one of the things that really drew the crowds initially and that put these bands on the map was this hippie dance crew that would go out and dance at all of their performances and draw the crowds in because it was very heavily publicized that you know, if you go out to these new clubs, you can see these crazy dancers doing all these wild things, and they serve the additional purpose of creating a big distraction so that people didn't necessarily notice that the music being played on the stage maybe didn't sound quite as good as it did on the radio.
Well, okay, so in the clubs, which sprang up immediately, we've got these freaks, which basically kind of set the tone for the hippie movement, which didn't really start in Haight-Ashbury. It started here in Los Angeles. Then we also have the entrance of the Young Turks. Explain to us who the Young Turks are.
Yeah, that was the other factor. The Young Turks were the young, up-and-coming Hollywood crowd. You know, the beautiful people of Hollywood who were on the rise. People like Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Peter and Jane Fonda, Sharon Tate, Bruce Dern, Dennis Hopper. various others who I can't think of their names right now. But anyway, they were all very much a part of the scene too, and a lot of them lived in and or hung out in Laurel Canyon and had a very, very close symbiotic relationship with the musicians of Laurel Canyon. And they were the other big factor in drawing people out to these clubs, because it was also publicized that they were there. And so, the initial attraction of these clubs when they first started opening up was, number one, to see these crazy hippies, doing these wild dance moves on the dance floor, and the opportunity to possibly rub elbows with Steve McQueen or Jane Mansfield or, these young glamorous Hollywood stars. And like I said, and that was also publicized, that these stars were out, hitting these clubs. And so those are two of the main factors that the Young Turks and the Freaks helped put these bands really on the map initially.
Well, strangely enough, the coincidences continue, because most of these actors that you're discussing had the same military intelligence backgrounds.
Yeah, they're very curious. Yeah, Dennis Hopper acknowledged not long before his death that his father had been a career intelligence officer, beginning with the OSS, continuing with the in his official bios, he's described as like a farmer and a postman or something like that. But Hopper actually acknowledged that his dad was in fact a career intelligence officer. And
Bruce Dern.
Bruce Dern, he was very tightly connected to the political establishment. His godparents were Eleanor Roosevelt and who was it, the perennial Democratic presidential candidate that never made it, Adlai Stevenson or something like that?
You're right.
And his uncle was a former Secretary of War, I think, who also happened to be a Skull and Bonesman. Around the same time as one of the Bushes, I believe.
Not surprising.
Bruce Dern seems to be very, very tightly wound into the political power structure.
So that just reminded me, while you were describing some of these people, back to Vito Polakis, who was the head of the Freak/Hippie group. He was related to the Rockefellers.
He was related to the Rockefeller family by marriage, yeah.
Dirty hippies, Rockefellers.
Yeah, they go together, don't
Absolutely.
they? I mean, when you think of hippies, you always think of the name Rockefeller,
Sure.
right? So yeah, strangely enough, this guy who had virtually faded from memory. I mean, it was very hard when I first started researching the book to find any information on him at all. His profile has been raised now. He has his own Wikipedia page, and there's websites out there that feature his artwork, because he considered himself an artist. He was a sculptor. He actually taught sculpting classes also, and had a celebrity clientele, people like
I'll bet he did.
Mickey Rooney, Jonathan Winters, and some big Hollywood names that he was connected to also. And but yeah, he was related by marriage to the Rockefeller clan of all people. So yeah, I mean, anything that's ever come up in the conspiracy world, whether it's Masons or Rockefellers or Rothschilds or Skull and Bones, or one of the people in this book is connected to it. One or more of the people in this book it's amazing how all of these names and themes just seem to pop up throughout the book.
Well, this is the perfect time for the entrance of Charlie Manson.
Charlie Manson.
Now, this guy shows up from Northern California, right?
Well, he had been doing time in
Right.
Terminal Island in San Pedro, and then when he was released, he first went to San Francisco and made the scene up there, and then, took his little magic bus and some of his followers and migrated down to L.A. and very quickly managed to integrate himself into the scene and be accepted by a lot of these people, although after the arrest, they just couldn't distance himself quickly enough from him. But there are quotes in the book from the era of people who just were singing his praises left and right. I mean, Neil Young just talked about him like he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys was a huge fan and
provided shelter.
And the Mamas and the Papas were very close. Both John Phillips and Mama Cass were very closely connected, so close that they were on the initial witness list to be called as witnesses at the Manson trials, but were never called and managed to keep their names out of the press for the most part. So most people don't even realize that they were so close. They were close enough that they were actually included as witnesses. So yeah, he was very close to, as were other members of his family, of the Manson family. Bobby Beausoleil, one of his, top lieutenants.
Played in Love, right?
Yeah, he was actually one of the rhythm guitarists for what would become Love. They were Grassroots at the time, and then they changed their name to Love. And right behind us here, and yeah, he was one of the original. There were two rhythm guitarists initially, Brian McLean and Bobby Beausoleil, and Bobby ended up getting cut in favor of a guy whose name I already forgot, even though I just said it. But one of the main reasons that he was cut in favor of Brian McLean, is because Brian McLean had a very close relationship with Vito Pelikas and the Pelikas crew, and so the band realized that they could use them to draw the crowds and build a name for themselves.
There you go.
So otherwise, Bobby Beausoleil might have stuck with them and carried on as a member of the band. So. Yeah, the Manson family was very, very tightly integrated into that whole musical scene, and accepted as a peer, accepted as a fellow singer. I mean, Dennis Wilson, the Beach Boys stole one of his songs and retitled it and released it. So.
And Guns N' Roses did one of his songs
yeah,
in the 90s. I am not part of Team Manson at all. I could never understand people, young girls especially, wearing the Manson t-shirts and stuff in the 80s and 90s. Like, I was not down with that at all.
A lot of the 90s bands were, Axl Rose used to wear his t-shirts some of the, who was it? Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, recorded the Downward Spiral in the Death House because he wanted to get the right vibe for the record or something.
Dave,
supposedly.
I'm not really down with serial killers.
No?
No. Speaking of blood, because there's more blood. It's all over the cover here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the cover. Notice the blood. The Wonderland murders.
The Wonderland murders.
Also in Laurel Canyon.
Right in Laurel Canyon. Yeah, the Manson murders actually occurred in Benedict Canyon, but all of the principals, both victims and perpetrators, were well known on the Laurel Canyon scene. And the Wonderland murders, which is the other probably the two most notorious to this day mass murders in the history of the city, were the Manson murders and the Wonderland murders. And the Wonderland murders were actually committed right in Laurel Canyon at the near the top of Lookout Mountain on Wonderland Drive. And the house is still in existence to this day. You can still drive by and look at it. It's unchanged, which is rather remarkable, because usually those kind of houses tend to be torn down and nobody wants to buy them or live in them. Like the Manson death house in Benedict Canyon was mowed down, and now there's this huge Mediterranean villa there. Have you seen it? It's
I'm not
hideous
sure.
eyesore. But the Wonderland death house still exists to this day. And both two very, very bloody mass murders, to say the least. Both of them involved 5 victims. All 5 died in the Manson killings, and one of the 5 survived the Wonderland bludgeonings. But those took place right in Laurel Canyon. To dealers who were selling to, like one of the guys from Three Dog Night, acknowledged in an interview that he had planned to be there that night to pick up his supply, and didn't make it. Luckily for him, perhaps. So so both of those murders are very, very closely connected to this scene that was supposed to be all about peace, love, and understanding, and flowers in your hair, and yet there's such a bloody and those are just the most high-profile deaths. Then there's all the individual, murders and suspicious deaths of people living in the canyon or very closely connected to it.
Dave, within the book, you have an entire chapter devoted to the Laurel Canyon death list. And another strange thing is how many people that would go on to be these large stars had parents who committed suicide.
Yeah,
it was remarkable.
Somebody just asked me about that the other day, and
which again, I mean,
Yeah,
realm.
very odd that, that was kind of like with Vito, when I first started coming across his references to Vito, I'd find just like these little throwaway facts that, he'd be mentioned like once or twice in an entire book, and I'd never heard of the guy, and nobody that I talked to had ever heard of him, so I just kind of brushed it aside at first, but he kept coming up over and over and over, and eventually I realized this guy just was in too many places. He was just happened to be in too many places at the time, and he must have been more important than I thought. So then I went back and researched him further and discovered that he was this hugely influential figure who was connected to the Rockefeller family and whatnot. And the same was true of the parental suicides. At first I'd say, well, that's kind of interesting, but not necessarily relevant. But they just kept piling up, and there were so many of them that at some point I just figured there's something to this, because there's just this is happening way too often. And the most notorious case was one of the Manson family girls. I think it was Catherine Scher, but I could be mistaken, who actually had 3 parents commit suicide. I mean, that's setting the bar. Both of her natural parents committed suicide, and then she was put into the foster system and adopted, and one of her 2 adoptive parents committed suicide. So yeah, this woman endured 3 parental suicides in her life, and I mean, you could just only imagine how traumatic and what kind of effect that would have on a kid. And there was a staggering number really of parental suicides.
Well, let's circle back to the bands, because you may be asking yourself, all right, Michael, Dave, you guys are laying out all these coincidences, but what does it all mean? And it seems to me the premise of the book, first of all, the Hills are alive for the sound of weirdness. And
it's very weird.
And beyond that, it almost would lead one to believe that perhaps the players here were either groomed for the positions that they would soon take, or maybe they were duped by the establishment, and one asks themselves, well, to what end? And I believe you make the point, and I buy it, that perhaps the whole hippie movement was largely created, why?
I believe to undermine the budding anti-war movement, which is one of the other. You mentioned one of the great misconceptions is that the hippie movement began life in Haight-Ashbury, which is the 99% of the people. If you ask them that, I'm sure that's what they would tell you. That was the birthplace and the sort of spiritual center of the hippie world, and it comes as a shock to a lot of people to find that it actually began a couple of years earlier right here in LA, because that's just not what most people think of when they think of that era. And the other great misconception is that the hippies were synonymous with the anti-war movement, but that wasn't the case initially. There was a anti-war movement already in existence, primarily on college campuses, that was centered around these very conservative, well-educated, straight-laced college professors, and they're equally
people you might have taken seriously.
Yeah, people that you might have taken seriously, and then suddenly they were replaced with these long-haired, bearded, bead-wearing, slogan spouting, LSD taking, and just, these people who everything about them, from their hairstyles, their clothing styles, their lifestyles, their, the free drugs and free sex and the whole lingo that developed around them just must have seemed, I mean, these people might as well have been from Mars to, people in mainstream America. And I mean, I grew up idolizing them and wishing that I had been born sooner so that I could have been one. But at the same time, I can see how that would be a much less effective face to put on the anti-war movement than what was originally on there. And there are quotes from people who were part of the original movement questioning whether, is this some kind of a government operation? Where are all these hippies coming from all of a sudden? And
well, Dave, we're talking about all these enlistment age young men, lots of drugs, lots of sex, underage girls. A, did any of these guys get drafted? B, did any of them do any time? Because, I mean, all of this is going on in plain view.
Yeah, that's another big clue that this may not have been. I mean, if these people were enemies of the state who were a thorn in the side to authorities and stuff, then the state had vast resources to bring them under control, and it wouldn't even have it required like very heavy-handed tactics. There was a draft in place. That's what the whole counterculture was all about, was, you know, opposition to the draft largely. And yet, and most of these people making the scene were draft-age young men. Yes. And yet none of them had their careers in it, not one. Not even like some minor player, like some long-forgotten drummer for the Turtles or something. I mean, I literally could not find a single case of any of the Laurel Canyon musicians who had their careers interrupted by the draft, which is pretty remarkable given the time. It's incredible. And, you know, this was an era when the country had very harsh drug laws, and these people were not only openly using drugs, in some cases they were openly trafficking drugs. Yes. And again, they never got anything more than a slap on the wrist, if that, and you know, consistently walked away from what should have been very, very serious charges with you know, a slap on the wrist at most. So, you know, like I said, again, the state had the tools in place to rein these people in if they were, in fact, you know, becoming a thorn in the side to the status quo, but yet they were allowed to, you know, do their thing.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Is it possible that the hippie movement, the great classic rock that emerged out of Laurel Canyon in the late 60s, early 70s, was a put-on? I don't think we're saying that. These people were talented. You take a person like Brian Wilson, you take a person like Frank Zappa. These were brilliant musicians, but perhaps there was a hidden hand. Maybe there was an agenda, maybe these musicians were duped, but the amount of coincidences in this book is outstanding. Dave, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. This is new and different for me, so
It's new and different for me too. Ladies and gentlemen.
Hopefully it went well.
The book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, please pick it up. I want to thank you guys for joining us. This was our first episode. I hope you dug it. Please like and share our videos on YouTube or your social media of choice. My name is Michael Parker, and next week we will be back with Dr. Susan Snyder. We'll be talking about neuroethics and the rise of artificial intelligence. Until then, you, me, I, we are the antidote. I'm out.